What's up guys, Sean here, AN Productions, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the Soda Dungeon 2 Alpha. We put the test out around early October, following our showing at GDEX, and we left it open for a couple weeks. We collected a lot of feedback, and today we're going to see what people thought. Did it suck? Was it great? Let's find out. So some of you probably know we ran into issues on the day of the sign-up. The original plan was that we were going to open up a 24-hour window for signups, and we sort of had a soft limit in our mind of like 300 players. And we weren't really planning on, we thought we might reach that, but based on our talks with Armor, we thought maybe over the course of the day we'd hit maybe 300, maybe 400, something like that. But as it turns out, we hit 300 people in about an hour. So unfortunately, we had to close the signups very quickly. I felt pretty bad about it because, you know, I told people there was going to be a 24-hour window, so if someone came 2-3 hours after the original sign-up date, it was already closed. Unfortunately, we couldn't do much about that. It's just we didn't want to send the game out to too many people just yet. You know, it's a very early version. We just wanted to sort of limit the amount of exposure to that version of the game, and, you know, we had to cap it off. Now, we are planning on, you know, in the future, we're going to revisit and do another alpha. At some point, we might just move into beta. I'm not 100% sure, but regardless, there will be more opportunities to play Soda Dungeon 2 in the future, so don't worry. So yeah, we had about 300 signups, and after the signups, we sent out keys, and almost everyone redeemed their key. Not quite everyone. I want to say somewhere in the 90% range. So, you know, that was pretty good. I was worried that we would get a lot of people that would basically get in early to the sign up and then not actually use their key, but that wasn't an issue, so no worries there. And then after we closed the alpha, we ended up with 118 responses to our survey. So not quite half, but that's honestly, all things considered, that's still a pretty good response rate for a test like this. So before I get into the survey responses, I actually wanted to take a look at some of the stats that we tracked in the game. So we kept track of a few things here. Most notably would be the level, the minutes spent playing, and the amount of gold that was collected in the game. Now, we tracked some other things as well. These other items were sort of to help us identify if people were playing the game correctly. Like we could potentially see how many times a certain menu was opened. If a player, you know, if they didn't progress to a certain point, we could potentially look and see, well, did they open the upgrades menu? Did they open the sodas menu? And if so, or if not, you know, why didn't they realize they could do that? But you know, for the stats that people are most interested in, level, you know, that's the classic Soda Dungeon metric that everyone's interested in. So we had Tim Power Gamer up here at level 405, which you know, I should learn to never underestimate Soda Dungeon players. The alpha was basically the first 100 levels of the game, and just like in Soda Dungeon 1, you could keep playing, the game would loop, and I was like, you know, maybe people will play to level 150. Like, I didn't think you could even really make it that much farther than 150 because there's no relics in the game. There's a set amount of equipment and you can't really upgrade much yet. I was like, yeah, level 150, you know, that'll probably be it. But of course, as expected, you know, Tim Power Gamer up here at level 405, which is just insane. And obviously our next top 20 users were well above 150. So just goes to show you that if given the opportunity, people will reach whatever level they're willing to put the time into. So I'm always impressed by that, and it's just kind of a funny thing that, you know, like I said, I still thought that there'd be a limit, but okay, so that was the level. So for gold collected, we had Snicky up at the top here at 1.5 million, which is kind of crazy because, you know, so if we had Tim at level 1, at the highest level of the dungeon, and he spent 500,000, we had Snicky here just completely grinding and farming the game to get to 1.5 million, which is also equally impressive and also equally useless for the game, though I do appreciate it. So most other players clocked in somewhere above 100,000 gold, at least you know, in the upper levels of the dungeon. And then lastly, we had minutes played. Now, minutes played is a weird metric just because it doesn't really it doesn't necessarily indicate anything. It's just sort of, it's there for the sake of being there. So, you know, we had because the game will track minutes played, like even if the menu, if you're just sitting in the tavern doing nothing and you leave the game open, it's just going to track minutes played anyway. So minutes played isn't really indicative of anything, but we track it just to sort of get a general idea of how much time people put into the game. So we had once again Snicky up here at well over 4,000 minutes of playtime. Still insane, but anyway, so that's just a few of the stats I wanted to show you guys. And now if I pop over to this tab, okay, so this is the actual response that we had. So if you played the game, you could fill out the survey. And so we emailed this out to everyone, and like I said, we got 118 responses, and the feedback was great. You know, we received a lot of obviously there's a lot of positive feedback, there was some negative, and there's some things that helped us sort of figure out what direction to take certain aspects of the game in. So starting up at the top, you know, we have your pretty basic, you know, 1 to 5 rating. What did you think of Soda Dungeon 2 so far? Vast majority said, well, actually not vast majority, but half said they'd rate it a 4 out of 5. We got a decent chunk rating it a 5. Most other people put it at a 3, and we had one person give it a 2, one person give it a 1. Now, obviously, I'm not too worried about that. I know that I don't know if these are necessarily troll responses. They could have just been people that just really didn't like certain aspects of the alpha, or they were expecting something different, and that's totally fine. But the fact that, you know, basically 86% of players would rate the alpha at a 4 or 5 out of 5, I think is pretty encouraging. So, you know, I feel good going into it that most people really like the game. We had a breakdown between Steam and PC. So about 60% people played on Steam, 40 on Android. So that's I don't know what I was really expecting there. I guess maybe it would have been a 50-50, but also because we do a lot of because we do like promotion on Twitter and more like website based areas, I suppose maybe the Steam PC crowd is more likely to see some of the promotion we do, and therefore they're more likely to sign up for the alpha. So that's just a kind of a guess there. We asked, now of course we tracked the minutes played, but we also just asked people how long they played, just to get an idea of what, you know, their sense of time was. And the results were kind of pretty spread out. You know, 10% were less than an hour. Most people were somewhere between 2 and 10, and we had about a quarter of players that were over 10 hours. Which again is still, I mean, it makes sense considering the stats on the leaderboard, but you know, still a little crazy to me that we had players playing our alpha for over 10 hours. So that was cool. Did you defeat the boss at level 100? It was basically a 50-50 split. You know, 52% said yes, 47% said no. Now, again, these responses are a subset of total players. So, you know, this is 118 people. Half of them said they beat it and half said they didn't. According to our internal stats of all 300 players, about, if I remember correctly, I think about 100 players beat level 100 or maybe 110. So about somewhere around a third of overall total players beat level 100, which we considered the end of the alpha. Okay, so here's where we're getting to some more interesting stuff. We asked, what would you rate the difficulty of the game? And, you know, the target, generally speaking, is that we want most people to give the game a 3, because that indicates that it's not too easy, it's not too hard. 3 is kind of that, you know, it's that nice even spot that you want the difficulty of the game to be at. And so we got a lot of people rating it 3, but far more rated it 4 than they did 2, and still significantly more rated at 4 than they did 3. So, you know, that indicates that obviously the game is too difficult or too grindy or too frustrating. And this is especially telling because pretty much everyone playing the alpha is someone who played Soda Dungeon 1. So these are people who are already used to playing Soda Dungeon, and, you know, if those players found the game too frustrating, then that definitely means that someone new to the game is also equally or more likely to find the game just as frustrating. So there were a couple of very specific reasons for that, and I'll cover that very shortly when I get into some of the more the feedback down below. But yeah, so for the most part, we're where we want to be. But this 4 needs to needs to come down a lot more, and this 2 needs to come up a lot more, or preferably the 3 itself needs to go up more. So that was some important feedback. Now, so then we started asking some general questions, just sort of like fill in the blank, like short answer kind of essay type questions. And so we asked what people, what they like the most, what they like the least, and some other stuff. So obviously this is way too much for me to like go through all the responses on here on the video, because it would just be a lot of talking and reading. So I tried to pick out just sort of general patterns of opinion and response. And so I would say that on the average, in terms of what people liked, I saw the crafting stand out a lot. Most people really liked the crafting, or at least what we were trying to do with the crafting system. So that's encouraging, because that's one of the new things that, that's sort of a big new mechanic that we're trying to feel out and make sure we do correctly. So a lot of people like the crafting. A lot of people liked, we had a lot of responses that just said, they like the new enemy sprites, the graphics, so on and so forth. Which is good. I mean, it's just, like I've mentioned before, the game's just a higher resolution, so we can make it's still the classic sprite art, but it can be more detailed. Pox has created more animations for all the enemies, so everything in general looks a little bit better, so I'm glad people are seeing that and they're happy with the transition from the old game. Other things people liked, in general, I would say that people liked the town system. We've been pushing this idea that you can build a town, and so now you have your tavern, but instead of everything being in the tavern, there's a series of buildings that you can go to and access some of the old features from the old game. But additionally, it gives us a lot of options for increasing the number of things we can do in the town, so the number of options to the player. So most people like that. And then we definitely got a few comments that people kind of like the story that we were going with. Now, Soda Dungeon has never had a super deep or intricate story. For the most part, it's a very lighthearted game where we just kind of be where we tend to be silly and goofy, and we're definitely keeping that theme in Soda Dungeon 2. But we added a mailbox system, so we kind of do this thing where, I don't want to, I guess, spoil too much because I know a lot of you haven't played it, but basically we allow the possibility of characters in the game to send you mail to sort of, further certain elements of the story. So if you compare that to Soda Dungeon 1, we never had a mail system, and while Soda Dungeon 1 did have a story that developed over time, it was more like, in the beginning, it was just kind of like you would play the first 100 levels, and then there was a bad guy, and he was just a bad guy, and you beat him up, and then you kept playing. So this time, it's a little different. There's a little more to it, and again, I think people like that, so I'm pretty happy about that. Now, in terms of what people like the least, now, funny enough, because people like the town and the crafting, those were also complaints as well, based on how they were implemented. So, for example, a lot of people like the town mechanic, but there's concern that, because you have to scroll through the town to get to certain areas, that, eventually in the game it's just going to be tedious and annoying to actually go through 5 or 10 buildings to get to the feature you want. So that's something we're definitely keeping in mind, and we have, a couple of potential solutions for that. We're just going to have to feel it out and see how people respond to it as more buildings get added to the town. In terms of crafting, a major issue we had is just the fact that crafting, right now, almost every enemy drops some sort of crafting resource, but we only make use of maybe 20 or 25% of those in actual crafting recipes. So we need to develop that system a lot more, because it's not super robust right now. So I think people are seeing the sort of limited nature of the crafting system and saying, well, this is kind of dumb in certain ways. So I'm hoping we can improve it to the extent that those that had issues with it will like it much better. We also organized we reorganized the crafting menu because it wasn't it was kind of hard to tell what you could and couldn't craft at a glance, and it wasn't super intuitive. So that's already been fixed, and I think that was one of the larger complaints that I saw. Other stuff is things like some of it's just stuff that naturally is missing in the alpha. Like we have a lack of characters, but we have a full set of characters planned, and because if you play Soda Dungeon 1, you already have access to all the characters. So going from that to the alpha of Soda Dungeon 2, it can be a little frustrating to be limited to those 5 characters, which is all we had in this version. Same thing with the music. We only had, so we made the new tavern track, which you may have seen here on the channel. But for the dungeon, all we have right now is one placeholder piece that's like 15 seconds long. So every area of the dungeon has the same music track, and it's only like a 10-second, 15-second segment that just keeps looping. So that gets really, it can get on your nerves really easily. So I understand why that's a complaint, but don't worry, because we're gonna obviously put more music in. Oh, one major issue that I'm glad we got sorted out right now, that was sort of controversial, is that we changed the turn order from Soda Dungeon 1. And I knew going into it that this could be an issue. So I did this because I was worried that in Soda Dungeon 1, the meta for endgame is sort of like, you just get to a point where you do so much damage that the opposing team just never gets a chance to attack. And it works because everyone on your team takes their turn, then everyone on the other team, on the enemy team, takes their turn. So as long as you can just out damage them and kill them, like, you'll never have to even go into a battle with them. And the point at which they finally do attack you is almost when you lose the game. So I wasn't sure if that was the best endgame meta for Soda Dungeon. So I tried a new system where it was an alternating turn system where you would go, then the enemy would go, and then back and forth. So I did that, but I also randomized the turn order of the starting order of the enemy team, because the thing was, if you killed someone whose turn it was, they would lose their turn, and it wouldn't just go to the next person in the team, it would revert back to your team. So it was a weird system that went back and forth, and it was based on a speed stat that I put into the game. But I don't think it's super intuitive, and based on our feedback, I think it's better off if we just revert to the Soda Dungeon 1 turn style. And the thing is, now that that system is in the game, we can still make use of it if we want to. There's nothing stopping us from doing some sort of late game or special modified dungeon that changes the turn order, where maybe it does go back to alternating, maybe it's random, maybe enemies always go first. You know, there's a lot of things we can do with it, but I don't think it should be the default. I think the dungeon itself should just stick with Soda Dungeon 1 style, and we should just keep it at that for now. I think people will like that the most. It's not confusing, it's very straightforward, and I think that's what people would prefer. And I think certain players like the idea of what we were trying to do, but overall I don't think it was worth it. So we've already reverted to the original turnstile system from Soda Dungeon 1. So, you know, that sort of negates that part of the negative feedback, so we don't have to worry about that. Other issues would just be, I think maybe the only other thing was that, you know, as always, we have AI complaints that the characters on your team kind of do dumb things where they don't heal at the right time, or they were using, I think they were using multi-hit spells for single targets, or like we have a miner class, and I think he was using, like, he has an attack that can mine ore, and I think he was using it on bosses sometimes when he really shouldn't have. So I've already tweaked a few things to fix that, but for the most part, when I get a chance to develop the actual Soda scripting system, that should take care of most of those issues, because you'll be able to just set, you know, don't quote me, but for the most part, almost any attribute that you want to customize in your auto combat, you should be able to set and get the results you want from that. Okay, and then we asked a couple more general questions of, like, what would you like to see added to Soda Dungeon 2, and do you have any additional feedback, that kind of stuff. I'm not going to get too far into that because it's a lot of miscellaneous feedback, and, you know, it's kind of disjointed and random. And I would say that generally, for the most part, a lot of the feedback that we see in this section is just sort of reiterating what the person already thought about an earlier question, or in a lot of cases, people are just requesting stuff that was in Soda Dungeon 1 that we don't have in the game yet. You know, for example, just like the arena, having pets, you know, those are things that aren't in the alpha yet that will be in the final game. So, you know, people are asking about where that stuff's going to be. And I would say, you know, almost without a doubt, any major mechanic or component that you saw in Soda Dungeon 1 should return to Soda Dungeon 2 in some form or another. So then we asked some questions about Soda Dungeon 1, sort of comparing the two games. And 100% of people responded had played Soda Dungeon 1, which is good. That means they have the right information to answer the second part of the survey. So the first question we asked was, does Soda Dungeon 2 feel like a proper sequel to Soda Dungeon 1? Vast majority said yes, which I'm happy about. Only 10% said unsure, and we had 10% that said no, that it doesn't feel like a proper sequel. And I think this is one of those things where there's no easy solution. When you take a game like this that has a lot of players in the original version and you give them a new version, it almost goes without saying that not everyone's going to like it. And you know, I think it's easy to say that most people did like it. There's always going to be that certain group of people who in this case they just maybe they expected something totally different. Like when they think Soda Dungeon 2, they think a brand new experience, a brand new everything. And there is a lot of new. I mean, a lot of Soda Dungeon 2 is new and remade and redone. But we're being very careful to stick to the original Soda Dungeon 1 formula, which is based on a lot of feedback we've received. You know, a lot of people kind of just want a better Soda Dungeon 1 with more content, more features, more everything, right? And that's been sort of our goal in a lot of senses. So, and I think that aligns with what most people gave us in terms of feedback. Also worth keeping in mind, you know, not to disrespect anyone who filled out this form, but it's only 118 responses. So that means 10 people didn't like it, right? You know, that's not necessarily enough information to draw hard conclusions from if 10 people didn't like the game. It's just something to keep in mind. Sort of similar question, does it feel too much like Soda Dungeon 1? So even though 80% said it was a proper sequel, only 66% said it didn't feel too much like Soda Dungeon 1. We had some, you know, more people were unsure and more people said yes. So this was a little bit higher. 21 people, 17%, said it felt too much like Soda Dungeon 1. So a similar sort of issue here is that I still feel very confident in the direction we're going with the game. Because the thing is, if it didn't feel too much like Soda Dungeon 1, if it felt too much like a new experience, there's a good chance that these 66% of people wouldn't like that. And, you know, if we're just considering this option, you know, it's in this specific case, it's sort of better to please the 66% than it is the 17%. And again, that just goes back to what I said before, that yeah, I think there's definitely a small percentage of people that were sort of expecting a brand new, you know, almost potentially spiritual successor to Soda Dungeon, where it was just a completely new experience with the Soda Dungeon name and universe. But you know, that's just not quite the direction that we're taking the game. Also worth mentioning, there's a lot of stuff we still just don't have in the game yet that's going to be brand new. Like we've, you know, just a small example is that we've completely reworked the path system from the first game for how you would choose doors that would take you to random, you know, like a bonus treasure or stuff like that. You know, we're completely redoing stuff like that. This game doesn't even have our second and third dimensions yet. You know, it's just the first dimension. We haven't even touched Soda scripting. So there's a ton of content that we're going to add to the game that I think would probably easily convince some of these 17% that it's not too much like Soda Dungeon 1. So that remains to be seen. We'll just have to play it by ear and see what people think of additional updates to the game. Again, more of these short form answers of, you know, what if anything did you prefer about Soda Dungeon 1, and what would you miss the most if it was removed from Soda Dungeon 1? Again, a lot of the answers just mostly revolved around stuff that we don't have in the game yet. A couple things I saw pop up pretty frequently were things like the Layer of Despair, so basically having a second dungeon to go into. In certain classes like the Dark Mage and or the Shifter, you know, the Shifter being a very unique class since it can learn other classes' skills. I don't know if the Layer of Despair specifically will come back in the same form, but we do have multiple dungeons planned in the very least, so I think that, you know, that's not going to be a problem. I don't see any reason why we wouldn't bring the Shifter back. I don't currently like have any work done on it, but I know it was a very popular thing in the first game, and it adds a lot of strategy to the whole idea of, like, you know, being able to use one class that can learn from others. So again, like I said before, you'd be hard-pressed to pick out something from Soda Dungeon 1 that we're just not going to have in Soda Dungeon 2. So it's kind of a moot point. Our reason for just asking these questions is to kind of get a gauge of what people want the most. Yeah, you know, what the biggest priority features are. It's possible that we may launch the game and it doesn't defaultly come with everything from Soda Dungeon 1, but we'll try to capture the main elements that people want the most. Then as time goes on and we do future updates, maybe we would do something like reintroduce the Shifter or bring back the Dark Mage or put out a second or third dungeon. You know, it's mostly a question of priority, not whether it is or isn't going to be there at all. So that pretty much covers the feedback. I just wanted to give a big thanks to everyone that played the game, that gave us feedback, that you know, had something substantial to give us. Or even if you didn't, you know, just playing the game, you know, even if you just played the alpha and you went to our Discord channel and sent us a message and you were like, hey, I like the game, but I didn't like this, or I did like this, you know, every little bit helps us shape the future of the game. Overall, I'm really happy with the response. Yeah, you know, obviously not 100% of people liked 100% of the alpha, but I think you also have to take into account that veteran bias, where a lot of people playing the alpha are coming from Soda Dungeon 1, which is a fully complete product that has had features added to it over time. So they're comparing, you know, Soda Dungeon 1 with like all the classes and the characters and the abilities and all the enemies and the items, you know, and it's hard to go back into an alpha for Soda Dungeon 2, which is very limited. So it feels, well, it is a very incomplete product. And but putting the two side by side in that manner can make certain aspects stand out as negative if you're sort of used to certain things in Soda Dungeon 1. So, like I said, I really think that once we get a little bit farther along, you know, we get into a couple of the dimensions, we get a couple of features added in like soda scripting, I think there's almost no reason people would prefer the first game over the second. At least I hope so. Not to say, obviously I love Soda Dungeon and I hope that everyone continues to play it, but, you know, our goal is to just do everything in Soda Dungeon 1 but better. So hopefully we get there. I don't think it'll be a problem. It's just going to be a matter of time. So I've had a lot of questions about when the next time people can play the alpha is, and unfortunately I don't have a great response. At first I estimated maybe a couple months, you know, from October, so that would put us in December or January. I'm not sure the game is far enough along yet from that original state to warrant another alpha test. Not to say that an alpha update has to be drastic, but I would prefer to have a significant chunk of changes in there, because the more that's changed, the more we can get feedback on. You know, like I would love to get at least a rough version of the soda scripting system in, because if we have that, then that's kind of a game changer for just how the game plays out, and I really want to see what people think about that. So in the very least, I want to get that done for an update, at least a few other major things off my checklist. So at this moment, I don't have a good answer for you, but like I said in the beginning, there will be more opportunities to play Soda Dungeon 2 in 2019. I promise you, there will, at some point in 2019, there will be some playable version of Soda Dungeon 2 that will be more widely accessible to most players. Just bear with us. Keep an eye out on our Twitter and our Discord and subreddit for updates. Hopefully, at the next time, we won't have to limit the sign up as much, but again, I can't make any promises. So, like I said, thank you guys very much for playing. Thanks for checking in with us. Next month, I would planning to do another video. I would like to cover that stuff I mentioned earlier with the new path system. So we're doing a few cool things there. If I can get the soda scripting system farther along, that would be great too. I would love to show some of that to you guys, but it's still a little bit farther down on the list for now. But other than that, I think that pretty much covers it for this video, guys. So as always, thanks for tuning in, and I will catch you next time.